Real spy scandals versus fake spy scandals. That is the topic of tonight's Byline. Spying is all the rage these days. We've seen plenty of spying headlines, some real and some fake. The sad part is that the trumped-up fake spy story will get far more attention than the real spy story. You may have heard that on the weekend, the RCMP arrested 53-year-old Canadian citizen named Quentin Huang, who was arrested for what? Spying? That's right.
I can tell you that the documents were of a confidential and sensitive nature to the Government of Canada. Any other information would be part of our evidence going forward through prosecutions.
Charges in relation to an attempt to communicate classified information to a foreign entity. The foreign entity is the Chinese government.
Actually trying to communicate with a foreign entity. This is the real spy story. A real person arrested for real spying. Then there's the fake spy story, the one trumped up by CBC last week.
Documents obtained by CBC News show that the U.S. was monitoring the communications of world leaders while they were all in Toronto for the G20 summit, and Canadian officials approved it.
Now, this claim by the CBC, based on documents they bought from Glenn Greenwald, who got them from NSA leaker Edward Snowden, was picked up by media outlets around the world without question. In the House of Commons, the NDP demanded answers during question period.
According to NSA documents, they closely coordinated with Canada to conduct widespread surveillance during the G20 summit in Toronto. We actually know that it's prohibited. The question was, did they do it? That's the question.
Not to be outdone, the Liberals quickly push for a new law. Wayne Easter says Canadians are deeply troubled by these reports that the Conservative government authorized the NSA to carry out a sweeping spying operation on Canadian soil, targeting world leaders during the 2010 G20 Toronto summit. Okay, let's examine this fake spy story for a moment. Bottom line, it's a trumped-up claim based on no evidence. CBC got this story from Glenn Greenwald. Greenwald's often described as a journalist, but of course he's more than that. He's most definitely an activist journalist, which I don't have a problem with because I am one as well. I have a point of view. He has his own. But the people that push Greenwald don't tell you his point of view, and they don't tell you about his past. See, before getting involved with the NSA leaker, Greenwald was a lawyer, and it turns out a porn promoter. He owned websites such as Harry Jocks and Harry Studs. He was involved in messy lawsuits over these business lines, and due to other troubles, currently owes more than 6 figures to the U.S. taxman. And that, more than dealing in stolen government secrets, might be why Greenwald lives in Brazil and hasn't been a U.S. resident for some time. Now, after his porn business, Greenwald eventually went into the media world. He had books on how evil George W. Bush and the Republicans were. The man has a definite agenda, and you should know about it, especially now that he's being paid with your tax dollars. So this is the guy that CBC bought the documents from. But what did they buy? Really, it's a steaming pile of nothing. Last week, CBC was trumpeting its big find. The most damning quote they used in their story was that the NSA was, quote unquote, providing support to policymakers. Really? You have stolen secret documents and you used them to claim that the NSA was spying on foreign governments in Canada, and the most damning quote you could find was providing support to policymakers. Pretty weak. Even the New York Times thought so. They came to the same conclusion I did. Providing support to policymakers was no smoking gun. They quoted University of Ottawa professor Wesley Warwick, a security expert, who said that if the NSA and the Communications Security Establishment Canada were spying in Canada, it might be illegal. But what CBC had put out, he said, did not provide enough information. The Times went on. It's also possible that the NSA operation in Ottawa was nothing more than part of the general security operations surrounding President Obama's trip. Now, today, the CBC released the full 4 pages that they worked off of. I think they were feeling the heat and felt that by releasing these documents, they could show how evil the NSA really was. Instead, I think it shows that Peter Mansbridge and Greg Weston made up a story and sold you a line. Here's the key line used by CBC in its full context. NSA is actively assisting protection and event security and providing support to policymakers. Really? That's it? Most of the document is a briefing on the fact that U.S. President Barack Obama was traveling to Canada for the G8 and the G20. It describes what the events are, who's involved, who's coordinating security for the event. Shockingly, it is the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa that's taking the lead on providing the American portion of security for the American president. Isn't that to be expected? Remember the CBC and opposition parties, and I know it can be hard to tell them apart. Well, they were screaming about the U.S. running a spy operation out of the embassy. Here is what the documents actually said. The Director of National Intelligence Representative in Ottawa is the United States government's intelligence lead for the G8 and G20 summits. The DNI Special Events Intelligence Coordinator will operate a threat integration center in the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa to support him during both events. So what's the big reveal here? That the U.S. government used their own embassy to assess threats to their president while he's on Canadian soil. This is not widespread surveillance operations aimed at foreign governments. This is a document about how the U.S. will work with their Canadian partners, the host country, to keep their president safe. It goes on. While NSA will have no physical presence in the TIC, direct coordination will be through the CTMMC and SN. These guys use too many acronyms, who will further collaborate with the special U.S. Liaison Office staff and provide threat warning directly to the venues. See, don't you think CBC should have included that in their story? The part about the NSA not being there? They claimed, with no basis in reality, no quotes to back it up, that the NSA was spying in Canada, on Canadian soil. And they didn't even include the fact that the NSA said in the secret NSA document they would have no physical presence. The NSA did lay out what their job would be for the summit. They said NSA support to both events may include, but is not limited to, executive protection, U.S. policy goals, situational awareness, threat information, and local security posture. Where's the mention of spying, of surveillance, of targeting foreign leaders? Like I said, we have real spying stories, and they normally involve Russians or Chinese trying to get stuff from us, actual secret documents. The CBC isn't so bothered by that. They want to be angry about Americans. They want you to be angry about Americans. So they partner with a former porn promoter, a man who hates right-wing governments just like the CBC does, and they sell you a story about Big Bad Harper allowing the NSA to spy with no supporting evidence. They've trafficked in stolen government documents taken from our ally, and they can't even claim it served a public good. They can't do that because they invented the story based on nothing more than a standard security document. Maybe the NSA did spy in Canada at the G20. This document doesn't show that. CBC should be embarrassed by their reporting. They should be hauled before Parliament, the people that signed their billion-dollar check, to explain themselves. And that's the byline.
We have arrested Quinn Hu Hang, a 53-year-old Canadian citizen. We charge him with 2 offenses under the Security of Information Act.
All right, lawyer and security expert David Harris joins me now in studio. And David, we'll get to Quentin Huang in a minute, but from what you've heard of this document, does this not sound just like a standard operational, the president's going abroad, here's what we need to know?
Well, it did, and the alarms went off last week when the original CBC article came out because we went through it in great depth, and frankly, by the end of it, we thought, well, hang on, there's a great deal of fuss in the media today based on this. Where is the beef? In fact, based on the general record of Mr. Glenn Greenwald in retailing all of these Snowden things with a certain anti-American, perhaps anti-Western animus, I couldn't help but think after what you've been saying that perhaps we might soon expect porn producers to rise in their thousands and protest against Greenwald's really indicting their good name.
I can tell you this, there is a story that he put out in the UK media about how Australia offered up secrets on its own people, and the Canadian government, Canadian spy agencies said no. But you won't get a headline on that. Let's talk about Mr. Huang. This is an actual spy story. He was not successful by the looks of it, but this is a continued pattern of people that some think are our allies, but they're really not, attempting to target us on an industrial level in this case. Why?
Well, look, this is a very important thing. Nothing's been proved in court. As you know, these are allegations. But they're major allegations relating to a $39 billion Canadian shipbuilding procurement plan strategy. And this has got implications going very far ahead in the life of maritime industries, but above all in naval and combat affairs, especially as they relate to the Pacific theater. And remember, of course, that we've just been seeing evidence of the incredible aggressiveness of China in relation to the Senkaku Islands. You remember all of that,
yep.
where they arbitrarily, unilaterally, in effect, claimed jurisdiction and tried to force that jurisdiction onto Americans, Japanese, and whomever else might have had an interest in that.
So how does that relate to Canadian shipbuilding?
Well, here you have, of course, the expanding Navy. There's a huge Chinese modernization program dealing with the naval industry and associated industries. And you'd imagine that any possible assistance to that through technology secrets, through insights into tactics and strategy on the naval front in Canada, through technology, would be of vast interest to the Chinese dictatorship. And whether or not this individual might have been on orders from anyone, and the police seem to deny that that was indeed the case at this point, it does nonetheless appear, based on allegations, that he might have been trying to shop some secret information around to China. And there are even vague suggestions that maybe somebody at the Chinese embassy might have been implicated in the receiving side of this.
All right, I do want to read a quote from Irving Shipbuilding. They're one of the companies in this $39 billion contract, as you say. They say, "We can confirm that the accused was at no time employed by or on Irving Shipbuilding property. We are further being assured by our subcontractor, Lloyd's Register Canada Limited, that the accused did not have security clearance and was therefore not involved in any work, nor did he have direct access to any classified or controlled information." Still, whatever he did have access to, enough to have the RCMP worried, enough for them to lay a charge.
That's right. And just because you don't have certain kinds of access or even clearances doesn't mean that you don't maintain informal relationships with people who may or may not have that kind of access themselves. And again, there's a lot of potential money at stake. There may be some concept of a Help China campaign. This is often used by China with respect to people who may have sympathies with China or might be seduced into assisting the dictatorship. So all of these things, of course, are going to emerge. But in the meantime, we have to warn people who may get close to China in any way that they may find inducements, they may feel under pressure or whatever to assist. And when China is so preoccupied with what it calls the Jinhai Fanquan, which is the offshore defense, as they call it, ever expanding now, you're looking at real pressure, real interest by those who are, in effect, our functional enemies on the high seas.
All right, David Harris, good speaking to you as always. David Harris with the details on the real spy story.